got some questions for you that we'll be able to answer. What was the name of this city before it became Kalamazoo? What was the vegetable that Titus Bronson grew to raise the money to buy this land? What is the oldest building still around in the area? And why do you think I have these two bricks on my table? Today we're going to talk about how Kalamazoo developed and what the area looked like in the early years of when Michigan became a state. Kalamazoo was founded in 1829 by a man named Titus Bronson, who came here from Ann Arbor. He was a potato farmer and was known as Potato Bronson. Titus was the breed of pioneers that you saw a lot of in the early half of the 19th century, typical of many people who came to Michigan. He was originally born in Connecticut, went to Ohio, came to Michigan, and finally settled in this area. The reason he settled in this area was the reason that a lot of people came to Kalamazoo County, because of the land. We had many prairies, which made it very good for farmland. The rivers made it a great place to come here. So it was really the land that brought Titus here. He originally came here in November of 1829 and set up his tent in what is now coincidentally known as Bronson Park. Historians think that his tent was located across from City Hall. He stayed in this area and liked it primarily because this area where the Kalamazoo River was located was the area that the Indians would cross, and where there was a trail here. He then spent the winter down near Schoolcraft with Basil Harrison, who was the first settler of the county, came back and with his wife Sally, and then in 1831 decided to plat the land and go to the land office, which was in White Pigeon, and plat the land for the area. This is the first map that we have of Kalamazoo, or back then as it was known, Bronson, named of course after its founder, Titus Bronson. It was set up in the traditional plat square area that you would find in a lot of towns in Michigan during this time period. What I would like to show here and emphasize are these four areas here. See, during these years in 1830-31, there was a contest between Bronson and Comstock to see which town would be called the county seat, which, as you can imagine, would bring a lot of business and financial business to your area. So it was very important. So as an incentive, what Titus did was to tell the territorial commissioners, I will give you 4 areas of land. I will give you a land for a public square or a courthouse square. For the first 4 churches that would be established in the area, a square for the jail, and a square for the academy. The commissioners were convinced, and in 1831, Bronson was declared the county seat. Now, the history of these 4 areas here, of course, in the courthouse square, there is still a courthouse. It's the 3rd courthouse that's there. Church Square, there are still 3 churches in that area. Jail Square and Academy Square were combined to form what is now known Bronson Park. The streets, in this early map here, we see some of the street names that we still have today. For example, we have Main Street right here, which was an old Indian trail. Main Street is now known as Michigan Avenue. And it was an Indian trail, and it was an area where it was the shallowest part of the Kalamazoo River, where people could ford over. And notice, though, Titus lacked a little bit of originality. We have 2 main streets in this map. We have a main street here, which is now Michigan, and we have a main street down here, which is now Rose Street. Some other names of streets that are still around, of course, is Church Street, because it was bordered the Church Square, Academy Street, because it bordered the Academy, and Jail Street. The jail was moved in 1845, and the street was renamed Park Street. Also notice, too, on this map, Arcadia Brook, although now we know it as Arcadia Creek. In fact, Titus first put his cabin on Arcadia Creek. It was a source of water, And later on, many of the early factories were located on this area for power. Water played a big role in where businesses and homes were located in Kalamazoo. Well, this map was in March of 1831. And a few months after that, Titus Bronson sold half of the area to a man named General Justice Burdick for $850. Now, wasn't that a deal? So in August of 1832, they came up with a new map. Here we have the second map of Bronson that was registered in the Land Office of White Pigeon in August of 1832. A big difference here. The streets are not all straight and at right angles like what we saw at that earlier map less than about a year and a half earlier. And the big difference was because Justice Burdick now owned half of Kalamazoo. And if you'll notice, Portage Street was at a weird, sort of strange angle and ended up right here. That was for a very good reason, because Justice Burdick that summer had just opened up with his brother Cyrene the first hotel of the area, called the Kalamazoo House. And General Burdick wanted to make sure that people came to the hotel. So he made sure that Portage Street ended up right at the front door of the Kalamazoo House. Did it succeed? Did it bring people to the hotel? We're not too sure, but this very strange intersection has been the bane of people coming into Kalamazoo for many years since, and it was all because of General Burdick. This is Bronson in 1834, 2 years after the last map we saw. And what a big difference there is. The area has grown tremendously. This map, you can also see the names of the first 13 original streets in the area. We've already talked about Jail Street. We talked about Academy and Church, because of course the three squares in this area. Now some new names that we see. Rose Street. We don't really know exactly what Rose Street was named for. We think perhaps it might have been after Nathaniel Balch's daughter. That was one of the ideas we think that it might have been. Of course, we have Main Street, Water Street, because of its proximity to Arcadia Creek, Burdick Street, which was named for Justice Burdick. Also, we have Portage, and down here, South Street, because it was the southernmost part of Bronson. The other two streets we can't see on this map are West Street and North Street, which also signified the boundaries of the area. Also here, the streets that are off towards what is now the East Michigan area really had names after pioneers. We had Edwards Street, which was named for Major Abraham Edwards, who came with the land office. We have Pitcher Street, which was named for a man named Zena Pitcher. We don't think Zena ever lived in Bronson, but he did a lot for this area, so they named a street after him. And we have Porter Street, which was named for George Porter. And last but not least, Harrison Street, which was named for Nathan Harris, or Nate Harris, son of Basil Harrison. Nate was the owner of the River House, which was a tavern and a hotel. And also, before there was a bridge over the Kalamazoo River, Nate ran a rope ferry over the river, which was located not far from the street that had his name. This map is also nice because it shows you the bend of the Kalamazoo River and also the Portage Creek, which was an area where they would portage over. If the river was too wide and deep, they would portage over the creek. Now, 1834 was a watershed year for the area because that was the year that the land office came here. It was in White Pigeon, but it came to Kalamazoo. And in 1836, the name was changed from Bronson to Kalamazoo. Why? Historians are still speculating about why that happened. Titus was a very eccentric character. There are stories that some people didn't like to be called Bronson and instead changed it to Kalamazoo. Most people think that it was because there was another Bronson, Michigan around, and there was a lot of confusion. Kalamazoo means place of the boiling water. the land office coming to this area was very important because it brought many people who normally might not come to the area. This was a time during Michigan's history when land was cheap. It was about $1.25 an acre. So people flocked to Michigan to buy land. And it was also a time when you did not have to have gold or silver to back your money. You could even buy land on credit. So in 1836, there was a tremendous land rush in Kalamazoo. People were flocking to this area. And it's been said that at the end of the year, over $2 million of land was sold from the land office. Well, what did Kalamazoo look like back in those early days? Well, unfortunately, we don't have any photographs. The first photographs did not come until 1860. So what we do have are drawings. Some of the early buildings we have drawings of are, for example, the Kalamazoo House, which, as I mentioned, was the first hotel in Kalamazoo, located at the intersection of Portage and East Michigan, and it remained on that location until around the turn of the century. Oakley's Restaurant, or in the Haymarket building, is there now. Another drawing we have is of the first Congregational Church, which during these early years was located on South Street just east of Rose. It was there, for about 10 or 15 years before they moved to their site on Church Square. Another building we have is the Academy. Now, the Academy was originally started as a branch for the University of Michigan in 1838. It did not stay a branch of U of M much longer. By 1840, they had moved out and gave the building over to the Kalamazoo Literary Institute, which had begun in 1833 as the Michigan and Huron Institute, and this is now known as Kalamazoo College. Another one, of course, we have is of the Kalamazoo Gazette, and this is a drawing of some buildings that were of a business section, and during these years, the business district in the downtown area was not located on Burdick Street, but was located in the East Michigan area. Another building we have a picture of is Fireman's Hall, which was one of very early brick buildings. This one was built in 1853, and it was located on Burdick Street. And this is where the firemen met, and it was also first public hall of the area. The first photograph we have of Kalamazoo is in 1860, and it's Main Street looking west from approximately Portage Street. The building on the right with the tower is where the Kalamazoo Center now stands. That building back then was the Burdick Hotel, which began in 1853. Also notice the dirt streets, the wooden sidewalks. Very interesting photo of Kalamazoo. Another photograph we have is of Main Street looking west from approximately the same time frame, and you see the black church with the tall steeple. That's the First Baptist Church. Looks a little different from what we see now. The church was originally constructed in 1855, making it the oldest church on Church Square and one of the oldest buildings in Kalamazoo. Next to the First Baptist Church, we see St. Luke's, which was an early Episcopal church designed by a famous American architect, Richard Upjohn. And way off into the distance, you can see Kalamazoo College. They moved to that location in 1850. Main Street, 1866, looking east. As you see here, the intersection really hasn't changed that much. And the building that you see at the intersection is what was known as the Humphrey Block, which was built in 1856. It was not built by a man named Humphrey, but named for a very beloved resident of Kalamazoo. And that area where the building stands is where we think the land office stood back in the 1830s. The Humphrey Block was also the location of the recruiting office for the Civil War. Kalamazoo, 1869 to 1870. Another shot of Main Street looking east towards the intersection of Portage and Michigan. You can see how Kalamazoo has grown tremendously back in those early times. The more brick buildings, Kalamazoo is really growing. It's right after the Civil War, and industry is really beginning to take hold here. And we do have a panoramic view of Kalamazoo in 1869. The building that you see on the right with the twin towers is Kalamazoo Hall, which was for female students attending Kalamazoo College. Of course, back then, when the building was built in 1859, women were not allowed to go to college with men, so they had separate facilities. During these years, there were approximately 7,000 people living in the area. And this picture was taken looking east towards the downtown area. Now, what's important when you look at these photographs of Kalamazoo is to remember that in the first 50 years of Kalamazoo's growth, everybody literally worked, lived, went to church, played within the downtown area for a very good reason. We were encircled by hills, steep hills that you could not get up. So people all lived in the downtown area. It made quite a different place back in those times. The thing that happened that changed that was in 1884 the streetcars were established, and that allowed people to live up West Main, up Oakland Drive, up in those areas there too. On this bird's eye map of Kalamazoo in 1866, we can really see those hills and other things that we've talked about. The Kalamazoo River. Now, this bird's eye view map was done by an artist, and it's a different perspective. It's looking west towards the city rather than east, as in most traditional bird's eye view maps. So we see the river with its very unusual oxbow, and this was straightened many years later. Also in this map, we can see the business district that we talked about. So where many of the businesses were located on the East Michigan area, and also on Main Street around in that area. And also we can see the courthouse that was built here. And also during these years, we do have Bronson Park. And also you can see here that the furthest building to the south was a very, very small house on West Street, the Octagon House. So if you can imagine, in 1866, this was the only building that was furthest south of this area. So it was quite a different area from what we're used to. Well, now at the beginning of this show, I asked some questions. We've already answered a couple of them. We know that Kalamazoo was called Bronson before it was called Kalamazoo. We know that Titus grew potatoes to earn the money for the land. Now, what about why I have these bricks on the table? And that's to show you that there are a lot of other buildings in Kalamazoo from this era, a lot of historic buildings that we have. These bricks that I have in front of me are from the Sweetland Block, which was built in 1861, and the building was located on, it still is, on East Michigan, almost next door to the American National Bank building, which is now the old Kent Bank. The other question I had is, what is the oldest building in Kalamazoo? That is the Justice Burdick House, which was built for Justice Burdick in 1838. It originally sat on Michigan, across from what is now the Kalamazoo Center. It was moved in the 1850s to where the Comerica Bank stands now, and in the 1880s it was moved to its present location of Westnedge and Vine Street, and the building is still there, making it the oldest building in the area. Well, Kalamazoo has many other older buildings. For example, the Austin Sill Home, which was constructed in 1846, and it's a style called Greek Revival, which was a very popular style in this area between the 1830s and the 1840s. Has some very distinctive ionic pillars. Next to it stands the Sill Terrace Apartments, which were built in 1869, Kalamazoo's first luxury apartments. But what's interesting about Sill Terrace Apartments is that the building has been hidden by another building called the Praying Building, which was built around it. One of the oldest buildings still on Burdick Street on the corner of Burdick and South And one of probably the most hidden buildings in Kalamazoo is the Bassett House, which was built in 1860 for John C. Bassett, who was a grocer in the area. He lived in the house for a while. His sister lived there. It later became a boarding house. And then around the turn of the century, the land was purchased by Dallas Buttman, and he encircled it by a series of smaller buildings, and the area was known as the Buttman Block. Another building that's hidden on South Burdick is Corporation Hall, which was constructed in 1867. It was built for the fire department, later for the village offices, became known as the City Hall, and when the city moved out, it became a department store, and other businesses were located there, and it's been hidden up by a covering over the building. We mentioned the Sweetland Block. Unfortunately, half of the Sweetland Block was destroyed in the tornado of 1980, but 2 of the windows still stand there. Not far from the Sweetland Block is the Humphrey Block, the intersection of Portage and East Michigan, now where the Biggs Gilmore Advertising Agency is now. This building was built in 1856, making it one of the oldest buildings in Kalamazoo. The First Baptist Church. As you will notice, the steeple is gone from the First Baptist Church, but the original building is still there, completed in 1855, and it is a nice example of Gothic architecture. South Street was first platted in 1843, and to many people it was the first, in quote, suburb of the area. They really thought you had a hike to get out there. We don't think very much now of walking to South Street, but back then it was. The oldest house on South Street is the Little Home, constructed in 1847. This house has never been moved from its original location on South Street. It was originally built for Hiram Arnold and later was the home of Frank Little. And it really is a little house. And it's a fine example of Greek Revival architecture. Next to the Little Home is the Carter Van Dusen home, built in 1866. This is a fine example of a house that was originally built in the Italianate style with its long, narrow windows and very squarish, geometric shape. Then around the turn of the century, they wanted to modernize it. So they added the pillars to give it a sort of colonial revival flavor, which was what was popular. Another Greek Revival home that's not in the South Street Historic District, it's in the Stewart neighborhood. And it's the Bartholomew House. It's on the corner of Woodward and Elmwood. And we don't know exactly when this house was built. We think perhaps around 1840. It originally sat on the corner of Woodward and West Main and was later moved to make way for another house. Well, you know, there are a lot of books that you can read that can tell you about Kalamazoo. And if you would like to read more about it, I would suggest the following. Dr. Willis Dunbar's book, Kalamazoo and How It Grew. If you want to learn more about historic houses, Peter Schmidt's book, Kalamazoo, 19th Century Homes in a Midwestern Village. Also, Walking Through Time, which was published in 1981 by the Kalamazoo Commission for Historical Preservation. If you are really into Kalamazoo history, I would suggest delving into the 1880 history of Kalamazoo County. And finally, to get another good background of Kalamazoo, I would also suggest Peter Schmidt and Larry Massey's book, Kalamazoo, Place Behind the Product. I hope you have fun learning about Kalamazoo.